Long before the age of spy thrillers and political scandals, one detective taught us that even the smallest clue can shake the foundations of power. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, doctor, soldier, and master storyteller, gifted us a mind unlike any other, Sherlock Holmes. A man who didn't just solve crimes, he restored honor, protected reputations, and sometimes healed broken lives. But what happens when a case threatens not only personal dignity, but international peace? In today's story, the Naval Treaty, a secret government document vanishes without a trace. A young diplomat's future crumbles overnight, and Holmes must uncover the truth before whispers become war. It's a mystery of stolen trust, fragile alliances, and the quiet danger that lurks behind locked doors and polished smiles. So, if you're drawn to stories where intellect defends integrity, and where even politics can't hide the truth, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, step into the quiet tension of 221B Baker Street. This is the adventure of the Naval Treaty. The July that followed right after my marriage was marked by 3 memorable cases, each one giving me the privilege of working alongside Sherlock Holmes and closely observing his extraordinary methods. In my notes, I've labeled them as the adventure of the second stain, the adventure of the Naval Treaty, and the adventure of the tired captain. The first case, though fascinating, involved people of such high rank and sensitive political matters that it must remain unpublished for many years. Still, no other case that Holmes worked on illustrated the power of his analytical thinking quite as vividly, or left such a strong impression on those involved. I still have an almost word-for-word account of the moment Holmes revealed the truth to Monsieur Dubuque of the Paris police and Fritz von Waldbaum, the renowned expert from Danzig, both of whom had gone off in entirely the wrong direction. The story, however, must wait until a new century arrives before it can be safely told. For now, I'll move on to the second case on that list. It, too, once hinted at national consequences and contained enough peculiar incidents to give it a uniquely unforgettable character. Back in my school days, I was close friends with a boy named Percy Phelps. He was about my age, though 2 grades ahead. Brilliant doesn't begin to describe him. He swept up nearly every prize the school offered and capped it off by earning a scholarship to Cambridge. Even as boys, we all knew he came from a well-connected family. His mother's brother was none other than Lord Holdhurst, a prominent conservative politician. Of course, that noble connection earned him no favors among us. If anything, we found it amusing to chase him around the playground and knock his shins with a cricket wicket. But things changed once he entered the real world. I vaguely heard that thanks to his talents, and no doubt his uncle's influence, he had secured a respectable position in the Foreign Office. Then, he completely slipped from my memory until a letter arrived and brought him sharply back into focus. The letter was sent from Briarbrae, Woking. It read, "My dear Watson, I'm sure you remember Tadpole Phelps,
who was in the 5th form when you were in the 3rd. Perhaps you've even heard that I landed a good appointment at the Foreign Office, thanks in part to my uncle. I held a position of great trust and honor until a terrible misfortune struck and shattered my career. There's no point in going into the details of that dreadful event here. If you agree to my request, I'll have to explain everything in person anyway. I've just barely recovered from 9 weeks of brain fever and am still extremely weak. Would you consider bringing your friend Mr. Holmes down to see me? I'd very much like his opinion on the matter, though the authorities claim nothing more can be done. Please try to bring him as soon as possible. Every minute feels like an hour in this horrible state of suspense. Tell him I didn't contact him earlier not out of disrespect, but because I was not in my right mind after the incident. Now I can think clearly again, though I try not to dwell on it for fear of a relapse. I'm still so weak that I've had to dictate this letter rather than write it myself. Please try to come. Your old schoolfellow, Percy Phelps."
There was something deeply moving about the letter, something in his repeated pleas to bring Holmes that tugged at my heart. Even if it had been difficult to arrange, I would have tried. But I knew Holmes well enough to be sure. he never turned down a worthy case. He loved his craft and always met the client's need with equal enthusiasm. My wife agreed. This couldn't wait. So within an hour of finishing breakfast, I found myself once again climbing the familiar stairs to 221B Baker Street. Inside, Holmes sat at his side table, dressed in his robe and deeply immersed in a chemical experiment. A large, curved retort bubbled furiously over the bluish flame of a Bunsen burner. Condensed droplets trickled into a 2-liter flask. He barely glanced up when I entered. Understanding the importance of his work, I quietly took a seat in an armchair and waited. With focused precision, Holmes tested various chemicals, drawing samples with a glass pipette, dipping into one bottle after another. At last, he brought a test tube over to the table, holding a strip of litmus paper in his right hand.
You arrive at a critical moment, Watson. If this paper stays blue, all is well. If it turns red, it means a man's life.
He dipped the strip into the test tube, and instantly, it turned a dull, dirty crimson.
Just as I thought. I'll be at your service in a moment, Watson. You'll find tobacco in the Persian slipper.
He turned to his desk and swiftly wrote out several telegrams, which he handed off to the page boy. Then he collapsed into the chair opposite me, folding his long limbs and clasping his knees with both hands.
A very ordinary little murder, but I believe you've brought something better. You always seem to bring storms with you, Watson. What is it this time?
I handed him the letter. He read it with deep, unwavering focus.
It doesn't tell us much, does it?
Hardly anything.
And yet, the handwriting is interesting.
But it's not his own handwriting.
Exactly. It's a woman's.
A man's, surely.
No, a woman's. And not just any woman. A woman of rare character. You see, at the beginning of a case, it helps to know that the client is closely connected to someone who, for better or worse, has an exceptional nature. My interest in this matter is already stirred. If you're ready, let's set off at once for Woking and meet this troubled diplomat and the lady who takes down his letters.
We were fortunate enough to catch an early train from Waterloo, and in just under an hour, we arrived among the fir woods and blooming heather of Woking. Briarbrae turned out to be a large detached house, nestled within spacious grounds and just a short walk from the station. After sending in our cards, we were led into a tastefully decorated drawing room. A few minutes later, a rather stout man entered and greeted us with genuine warmth. He appeared to be nearer 40 than 30, though his rosy cheeks and lively, mischievous eyes gave him the look of a cheerful, well-fed boy. He seemed truly pleased by our arrival and shook our hands with evident enthusiasm. He explained that Percy had been asking for us all morning, desperately clinging to any sign of hope. Harrison also mentioned that Percy's parents were too distressed to speak about the matter themselves, so they had requested him to meet with us on their behalf.
We haven't been given any details yet, and I take it you're not a member of the family?
The man looked momentarily startled, but quickly burst into laughter as he glanced down, realizing the source of our interest. He explained that we must have noticed the initials JH on his locket, which momentarily gave him the impression that Holmes had deduced something extraordinary. Introducing himself as Joseph Harrison, he shared that Percy was soon to marry his sister, Annie, which would make him a relative by marriage. He added that Annie had been tirelessly caring for Percy for the past 2 months, staying by his side day and night. With a smile, he suggested that we head in without delay, knowing how eagerly Percy had been waiting to see us. The room we entered was on the same floor as the drawing room. It served both as a sitting room and a bedroom, filled with dainty floral arrangements in every corner. A young man, pale and visibly worn, lay stretched out on a sofa near the open window. The scent of the garden and the warm summer breeze drifted in. Beside him sat a woman, who rose quietly as we entered. She glanced at Percy as if seeking his permission to leave, but he gently held her hand to keep her close.
How are you, Watson? I wouldn't have recognized you under that mustache, and I doubt you'd be able to swear it's me, either. And this must be your famous friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes?
I introduced Holmes briefly, and we both sat down. Joseph Harrison had left the room, but his sister remained at Percy's side, her hand still held gently in his. She was a striking woman, perhaps a bit short and broad to be classically graceful, but her olive skin, large Italian eyes, and thick black hair gave her a rich, magnetic beauty. Her vivid complexion made Percy's pale and haggard face appear even more ghostly by contrast.
"I won't waste your time,"
he said, raising himself up on the sofa.
"I'll get straight to the point without any preamble. I was a happy and successful man, Mr. Holmes, and just about to be married, when a sudden and terrible misfortune destroyed all my life's prospects. I was, as Watson may have told you, working in the Foreign Office. Thanks to my uncle, Lord Holdhurst, I rose quickly to a position of great responsibility. When my uncle became foreign minister in the current administration, he entrusted me with several sensitive assignments. I carried them all out successfully, and over time, he developed the highest confidence in my discretion and skill. About 10 weeks ago, on the 23rd of May, to be exact, he called me into his private office. After complimenting me on my work, he told me he had a new and delicate assignment for me. My uncle took out a gray roll of paper from his bureau and told me it was the original draft of a secret treaty between England and Italy, something of such sensitivity that even a rumor of it had already made its way into the public press. He emphasized how vital it was that no further information should leak. According to him, both the French and Russian embassies would be willing to pay a great deal to obtain the contents of that document. He normally wouldn't have allowed it to leave his bureau, but in this case, it was absolutely necessary that it be copied. He asked if I had a desk in my office, and when I confirmed, he instructed me to take the treaty and lock it securely there. He said he would arrange for me to stay behind after the others had left, so I could copy it in privacy without fear of being disturbed. Once finished, I was to relock both the original and the draft in my desk and hand them over to him personally the next morning. I took the documents and...
One moment. Were you alone during this conversation?
Absolutely.
A large room.
About 30 feet in either direction.
Were you in the center?
Roughly, yes.
And speaking low?
My uncle always speaks very quietly. I barely spoke at all.
Thank you,
said Holmes, closing his eyes.
Please continue.
I did exactly what he instructed. I stayed behind after the other clerks had left. One of them, Charles Gorrett, was still in my room catching up on some overdue work, so I left him there while I went out for dinner. When I returned, he had gone. When I looked over the treaty, I realized at once that my uncle hadn't exaggerated. I won't go into the sensitive content, but I can say that it defined Britain's position regarding the Triple Alliance and outlined our country's likely policy if the French fleet ever gained full dominance over the Italians in the Mediterranean. The matters discussed were entirely naval, and the signatures of high-ranking officials appeared at the end. I skimmed it and then got to work. It was a lengthy document, written in French, with 26 separate articles. I copied as fast as I could, but by 9 o'clock, I had only completed 9 articles. It became clear that I wouldn't make my train. I was getting drowsy and sluggish, partly from dinner, partly from a long workday. I thought a cup of coffee might sharpen my mind. A commissionaire usually stays overnight in a little lodge at the foot of the stairs. He often makes coffee on a spirit lamp for officials working late. So I rang the bell to call him. To my surprise, it was a woman who responded. She was large, coarse-faced, elderly, and wore an apron. She explained that she was the commissionnaire's wife and that she handled the cleaning. I gave her the order for coffee. I managed to write 2 more articles, but I was feeling sleepier than ever, so I got up and walked around the room to stretch my legs. Still no coffee. I wondered what could be causing the delay. I opened the door and headed down the corridor. There was a straight passageway, dimly lit, which led out from the room where I'd been working. It was the only exit. It ended in a curved staircase, and the commissionnaire's lodge was at the end of the hall below. Halfway down that staircase, there's a small landing where another hallway branches off at a right angle. That second passage connects to a narrow staircase that leads to a side entrance. That door is used by servants and often by clerks as a shortcut from Charles Street. Here, let me show you a rough diagram of the layout.
Thank you. I think I quite follow you.
I can't stress enough how important this part is. After leaving the room, I went downstairs into the hall, where I found the commissionaire fast asleep inside his box. The kettle on the spirit lamp was boiling furiously, and water was already spilling out onto the floor. I immediately took the kettle off and extinguished the flame. As I reached out to wake him, he was still sound asleep. But just then, a bell above his head rang loudly, and he woke with a start, clearly bewildered to see me standing there. I told him I had come down to check if my coffee was ready, and he replied that he must have fallen asleep while boiling the water. What happened next sent a chill through me. He looked at me, and then glanced up at the bell, which was still vibrating slightly. Then he asked a question that stopped me cold, if I was standing there with him, who had rung the bell. It was then I realized the bell was connected to the very room I had just left, the room where the secret treaty lay on the desk. A terrible sense of dread gripped me. I turned and bolted up the stairs, ran down the corridor, and burst into the room. The hallway had been empty. I hadn't seen a soul. But when I reached the room, although everything else looked just as I had left it, the worst had happened. The original treaty was gone. Only the copy remained on the desk.
Holmes sat up in his chair, rubbing his hands together. It was clear that the case had fully captured his interest.
What did you do then?
I knew instantly the thief must have used the side staircase. Had he come up the main way, I would have seen him.
You're sure he wasn't hiding in the room or the corridor, which you said was dimly lit?
Absolutely sure. Not even a rat could have hidden in that room or passage. There was no place to conceal anything.
Thank you. Please go on.
The commissionaire, seeing my pale face, followed me upstairs. Together, we rushed down the side stairs leading to Charles Street. The door at the bottom was closed but not locked. We threw it open and ran out. Just then, I heard 3 chimes from a nearby clock. It was 9:45.
That's very important,
Said Holmes, jotting a note on his shirt cuff.
The night was oppressively dark, and a thin, warm rain had begun to fall. Charles Street itself was deserted, but from the far end, near Whitehall, the familiar noise of heavy traffic echoed through the mist. Without wasting a second, we dashed down the pavement, bareheaded and breathless. At the far corner, we finally came upon a policeman standing watch. Barely able to speak, I told him that a robbery had occurred, a document of immense value had been stolen from the Foreign Office, and asked whether anyone had passed that way. The officer replied that he had been stationed there for the past 15 minutes and had only seen a single person go by during that time, a tall, elderly woman wrapped in a paisley shawl. At once, the commissionaire insisted that the woman was his wife and quickly asked if anyone else had passed. The officer confirmed there hadn't been. The commissionaire immediately concluded that the thief must have gone in the opposite direction and urged me to follow him. But something about his eagerness to draw me away stirred suspicion in my mind. I pressed the constable further, asking which direction the woman had gone. He couldn't say for certain. He had noticed her in passing, but hadn't paid her much attention, except that she seemed to be in a hurry. He estimated that it had been no more than 5 minutes since she passed. The commissionaire grew impatient, insisting I was wasting precious time and that his wife could not possibly be involved. Before I could say anything more, he declared that if I wouldn't go, he would, and took off down the street on his own. I immediately ran after him and caught him by the sleeve, demanding his address. He told me he lived at 16 Ivy Lane, Brixton, but again urged me not to waste time chasing shadows and to come with him to the other end of the street to make further inquiries. Since there was nothing to lose, I followed his suggestion. Along with the constable, we made our way to the opposite end, only to find the area crowded despite the rain, people hurrying through the wet night, eager to reach shelter. There was no bystander or loiterer nearby who could tell us anything useful about who might have passed that way. We returned to the office and began a careful search of the stairs and passage, but yielded nothing. The corridor that led to the room was covered in a creamy linoleum that easily captured footprints. We examined it thoroughly, hoping for any sign of disturbance, but found no outline, no trace at all. It had been raining steadily since around 7 o'clock, which raised an obvious concern. Anyone entering the building after that time should have left muddy footprints. The absence of such marks was puzzling. But then I recalled something that gave me a possible explanation. The cleaning women or charwomen often removed their boots at the commissionnaire's office and wore soft, list slippers while inside. That might explain the lack of any muddy tracks, even if someone had entered at around 9 o'clock. The weather, the floor, and the circumstances all made it even more baffling. There were simply no marks to go by. Still perplexed, we turned our attention to the room itself. We examined every part of it. There was no chance of a hidden door, and the windows, over 30 feet above ground, were securely fastened from the inside. The thick carpet ruled out any possibility of a trapdoor, and the ceiling was just ordinary whitewash. I am absolutely certain that the only way anyone could have entered or exited was through the single door. We considered the fireplace as well, but was unused. The room had a stove instead. The bell rope hung just to the right of my desk, and for it to have been pulled, someone would have had to approach the desk directly. That detail only deepened the mystery. Why would anyone intending to steal such a critical document deliberately draw attention by ringing a bell? Finding no answer, we continued to examine the room for any possible trace left by the intruder. A cigar end, a glove, a hairpin, anything. But there was nothing. We hadn't even thought to check for smell, but I don't smoke myself, and I feel confident that I would have noticed any lingering scent of tobacco. There was absolutely no clue, no indication whatsoever of who had been there. The only tangible detail we had was that the commissionnaire's wife, Mrs. Tangi, had hurriedly left the building around the same time. Her husband claimed it was her usual time to go home and couldn't offer any further explanation. The policeman and I concluded that our best course of action would be to find her immediately before she had a chance to dispose of the document, assuming she had taken it. By that time, the alarm had already reached Scotland Yard, and Detective Forbes arrived promptly, taking charge of the case with considerable energy. Without delay, we hired a hansom cab and set off toward the address we had been given. Within half an hour, we reached the location. A young woman, who turned out to be Mrs. Tangi's eldest daughter, answered the door. She informed us that her mother hadn't returned home yet, and we were shown into the front room where we waited. Roughly 10 minutes later, we heard a knock at the door. And here I must admit we made a serious mistake, one I blame myself for. Instead of answering the door ourselves, we let the daughter go. From where we sat, we heard her tell her mother that 2 men were waiting inside the house. Almost immediately afterward, there was the sound of hurried footsteps dashing down the passage. Forbes reacted instantly, flinging open the door, and both of us rushed toward the back of the house. We entered the kitchen just a moment too late. Mrs. Tangi was already there. She stared at us defiantly at first, but as soon as she recognized me, her expression changed to one of complete astonishment. The moment had clearly unsettled her, but she attempted to deflect suspicion by offering an explanation, one that neither of us found convincing. Forbes informed her directly that we had grounds to believe she had taken an important document from a foreign office and had likely run into the house to dispose of it. He told her she would need to come with us to Scotland Yard to be searched. Despite her protests and resistance, we summoned a 4-wheeler cab and escorted her there. Before leaving, we had searched the kitchen thoroughly, paying particular attention to the fireplace to see if she might have destroyed the papers during the few seconds she had been alone. But there were no signs, no burnt ashes, no scraps, nothing. Once we reached Scotland Yard, she was immediately handed over to the female searcher. I waited in absolute agony for the outcome. When the searcher finally returned, she reported that there was no trace of the missing documents. It was only then that the full weight of my situation truly struck me. Until that moment, I had been too focused on taking action to think clearly. I had believed, almost blindly, that I would recover the treaty. But once all efforts had failed, I was forced to face the consequences. The shame was overwhelming. Watson can tell you, I've always been sensitive by nature. The thought of how I had let down my uncle, the cabinet, and everyone connected to me was unbearable. Even though I was the victim of an extraordinary accident, I knew such excuses held no weight in matters of diplomacy. I felt utterly ruined. I can't recall exactly what happened next. I think I broke down. Officials gathered around me, trying to calm me. One of them accompanied me to the station, and fortunately, Dr. Ferrier happened to be on the same train. He took charge of me, and it was a blessing he did. I collapsed at the station and became violently ill before reaching home. You can imagine the panic at home when they saw me in that state. Annie and my mother were devastated. The doctor explained what little he knew, and it was clear I would be sick for a long time. Joseph gave up this room, which became my sickbed for the next 9 weeks. I was unconscious most of the time, lost in fever. If it hadn't been for Miss Harrison's constant care and the doctor's attention, I wouldn't be here now. Slowly, I began to recover, and only in the past 3 days has my memory fully returned. The first thing I did was contact Mr. Forbes. He came immediately but told me that no clue had been found. The commissionaire and his wife were questioned thoroughly, but nothing came of it. Suspicion even fell on young Gorret, who had stayed late at the office that night, partly because of his French name. But he had left before I began my work, and nothing connected him to the theft. Now, Mr. Holmes, I have no one left to turn to. You are my last hope. If you cannot help me, I fear both my honor and my career will be lost forever.
The invalid sank back upon his cushions, exhausted from the lengthy account he had just given, while the nurse quietly poured him a glass of some sort of stimulating medicine. Holmes sat silently, his head leaning back and his eyes closed. To an outsider, he might have seemed indifferent, but I knew well that this posture meant he was entirely absorbed in thought.
Your statement has been so explicit,
said Holmes at last,
that you have really left me very few questions to ask. There is one of the utmost importance, however. Did you tell anyone that you had this special task to perform?
No one.
Not Miss Harrison here, for example?
No. I had not been back to Woking between getting the order and executing the commission.
And none of your people had by chance been to see you?
None.
Did any of them know their way about in the office?
Oh, yes. All of them had been shown over it.
Still, of course, if you said nothing to anyone about the treaty, these inquiries are irrelevant.
I said nothing.
Do you know anything of the commissionaire?
Nothing except that he is an old soldier.
What regiment?
I have heard Coldstream Guards.
Thank you. I have no doubt I can get details from Forbes. The authorities are excellent at amassing facts, though they do not always use them to advantage.
Holmes then strolled past the couch toward the open window, pausing to lift a drooping stalk of a moss rose. He studied its delicate blend of crimson and green with unexpected appreciation. It was a side of him I had rarely seen, a genuine interest in nature.
What a lovely thing a rose is. There's nothing in which deduction is so necessary as in religion. It can be built up as an exact science by the reasoner. Our highest assurance of the goodness of Providence seems to me to rest in the flowers. All other things, our powers, our desires, our food, are all really necessary for our existence in the first instance. But this rose is an extra. Its smell and its color are an embellishment of life, not a condition of it. It is only goodness which gives extras. And so I say again that we have much to hope from the flowers.
Both Percy Phelps and his nurse looked at Holmes during this strange moment of contemplation. Surprise and a clear sense of disappointment were written on their faces. Holmes remained in a deep reverie, the moss rose gently twirling between his fingers. Minutes passed in silence until the young lady finally broke it, her tone slightly sharp as she asked Holmes whether he saw any prospect of solving the mystery.
"Oh, the mystery,"
he exclaimed, suddenly brought back to the present.
"Well, it would be absurd to deny that the case is a very abstruse and complicated one, but I can promise you that I will look into the matter and let you know any points which may strike me."
The young lady pressed further, inquiring whether he saw any clue.
"You have furnished me with 7, but of course, I must test them before I can pronounce upon their value."
She then asked whether Holmes suspected anyone in particular.
"I suspect myself."
What?
"Of coming to conclusions too rapidly."
With a bit of insistence, Miss Harrison urged him to go to London and test his conclusions.
"Your advice is very excellent, Miss Harrison. I think, Watson, we cannot do better. Do not allow yourself to indulge in false hopes, Mr. Phelps. The affair is a very tangled one."
I shall be in a fever until I see you again.
"Well, I'll come out by the same train tomorrow, though it's more than likely that my report will be a negative one."
God bless you for promising to come. It gives me fresh life to know that something is being done. By the way, I have had a letter from Lord Holdhurst.
"What did he say?"
He was cold but not harsh. I dare say my severe illness prevented him from being that. He repeated that the matter was of the utmost importance, and added that no steps would be taken about my future, by which he means, of course, my dismissal, until my health was restored and I had an opportunity of repairing my misfortune.
"Well, that was reasonable and considerate. Come, Watson, for we have a good day's work before us in town."
Mr. Joseph Harrison drove us down to the station, and soon we were speeding toward London in a Portsmouth train. Holmes remained immersed in deep thought, barely uttering a word until we had passed Clapham Junction.
"It's a very cheery thing to come into London by any of these lines which run high and allow you to look down upon the houses like this."
I assumed he was being ironic, for the view was dreary and unappealing. But Holmes soon clarified his thoughts.
"Look at those big, isolated clumps of buildings rising up above the slates, like brick islands in a lead-colored sea.
The board schools.
Lighthouses, my boy. Beacons of the future. Capsules with hundreds of bright little seeds in each, out of which will spring the wise, better England of the future. I suppose that man Phelps does not drink."
I should not think so.
"Nor should I, but we are bound to take every possibility into account. The poor devil has certainly got himself into very deep water, and it's a question whether we shall ever be able to get him ashore. What did you think of Miss Harrison?"
A girl of strong character.
"Yes, but she is a good sort, or I am mistaken. She and her brother are the only children of an ironmaster somewhere up Northumberland way. He got engaged to her when traveling last winter, and she came down to be introduced to his people, with her brother as escort. Then came the smash, and she stayed on to nurse her lover, while brother Joseph, finding himself pretty snug, stayed on too. I've been making a few independent inquiries, you see, but today must be a day of inquiries."
My practice.
"Oh, if you find your own cases more interesting than mine."
I was going to say that my practice could get along very well for a day or two, since it is the slackest time in the year.
"Excellent. Then we'll look into this matter together. I think that we should begin by seeing Forbes. He can probably tell us all the details we want until we know from what side the case is to be approached."
You said you had a clue?
"Well, we have several, but we can only test their value by further inquiry. The most difficult crime to track is the one which is purposeless. Now, this is not purposeless. Who is it who profits by it? There's the French ambassador. There's the Russian. There's whoever might sell it to either of these. And there's Lord Holdhurst."
Lord Holdhurst.
"Well, it is just conceivable that a statesman might find himself in a position where he was not sorry to have such a document accidentally destroyed."
Not a statesman with the honorable record of Lord Holdhurst.
"It is a possibility, and we cannot afford to disregard it. We shall see the noble lord today and find out if he can tell us anything. Meanwhile, I have already set inquiries on foot."
Already?
"Yes, I sent wires from Woking Station to every evening paper in London. This advertisement will appear in each of them."
He handed me a sheet torn from his notebook. Scribbled in pencil, it read, "Pound 10 reward. The number of the cab, which dropped a fare at or about the door of the Foreign Office in Charles Street at 10:15 in the evening of May 23rd. Apply 221B, Baker Street. You are confident that the thief came in a cab?
If not, there is no harm done. But if Mr. Phelps is correct in stating that there is no hiding place either in the room or the corridors, then the person must have come from outside. If he came from outside on so what a night, and yet left no trace of damp upon the linoleum, which was examined within a few minutes of his passing, then it is exceedingly probable that he came in a cab. Yes, I think that we may safely deduce a cab.
It sounds plausible.
That is one of the clues of which I spoke. It may lead us to something. And then, of course, there is the bell, which is the most distinctive feature of the case. Why should the bell ring? Was it the thief who did it out of bravado? Or was it someone who was with the thief, who did it in order to prevent the crime? Or was it an accident? Or was it?
At that moment, Holmes sank back once more into deep, silent thought. But to me, well accustomed to all the nuances of his mood, it appeared as though some new possibility had just flashed across his extraordinary mind. It was 3:20 when we reached our terminus, and after a quick lunch at the buffet, we made our way directly to Scotland Yard. Holmes had already sent a telegram to Forbes, and we found him waiting for us, a small, foxy-looking man with a sharp, though hardly friendly expression. His manner toward us was distinctly cold, especially upon learning the purpose of our visit.
I've heard of your methods before now, Mr. Holmes. You're always ready to use any information the police can provide, and then you try to finish the case yourself and take the credit away from us.
On the contrary, out of my last 53 cases, my name appeared in only 4, while the police took all the credit in the remaining 49. I don't blame you for not knowing this. You're inexperienced. But if you want to succeed in your new role, you'll work with me, not against me.
The detective's tone changed immediately.
I'd be very glad of a hint or two. I've certainly received no credit from this case so far.
What steps have you taken?
Tangi, the commissionaire, has been shadowed. He left the guards with a good record, and we've found nothing against him. His wife, though, is a bad sort. I suspect she knows more than she lets on.
Have you had her followed?
We've assigned one of our women to her. Mrs. Tangi drinks, and our agent was with her twice when she was quite intoxicated, but still couldn't get anything out of her.
I understand brokers were at their house.
Yes, but they were paid off.
Where did the money come from?
That was all above board. His pension had come in. They haven't shown any sign of suddenly coming into money.
What explanation did she give for answering the bell when Mr. Phelps rang for coffee?
She said that her husband was very tired and she wished to relieve him.
Well, that matches with him being found asleep in his chair a bit later. So there's nothing really against them, except her character. Did you ask why she left so hurriedly that night? A police constable noticed her haste.
She said she was later than usual and wanted to get home quickly.
Did you mention that she got home after you and Mr. Phelps, who started 20 minutes later?
She explained that by saying she took a bus while we had a hansom.
Did she make it clear why she ran into the back kitchen upon reaching her house?
She said the money to pay the brokers was kept there.
She has at least an answer for everything. Did you ask her whether in leaving she met anyone or saw anyone loitering about Charles Street?
She saw no one besides the constable.
Well, you seem to have cross-examined her thoroughly. What else have you done?
The clerk, Goret, has been shadowed all these 9 weeks without any result. We can't prove anything against him.
Anything else?
No, nothing else to go on. No evidence at all.
Have you formed a theory about how that bell rang?
I must admit I'm baffled. It was a bold move, whoever it was, to ring the alarm like that.
Yes, quite an odd thing to do. Many thanks for your information. If I can put the man into your hands, you'll hear from me. Come along, Watson.
Where are we going now? I asked as we left the office.
We're off to see Lord Holdhurst, the cabinet minister and future premier of England.
Luckily, Lord Holdhurst was still in his chambers at Downing Street, and once Holmes sent in his card, we were quickly ushered upstairs. The statesman welcomed us with the classic courtesy for which he was known and invited us to sit on the plush lounges flanking the fireplace. Standing on the rug between us, his slim, tall figure, sharp features, thoughtful expression, and slightly graying curls gave him the air of a truly noble gentleman.
Your name is very familiar to me, Mr. Holmes. And naturally, I can't pretend to be unaware of the purpose of your visit. There's only been one incident here, lately that could call for your attention. May I ask whose interest you're representing?
In that of Mr. Percy Phelps.
Ah, my unfortunate nephew. You'll understand that our relationship makes it all the harder for me to shield him in any way. I fear this incident may have a very damaging effect on his career.
But if the document is recovered?
Well, that would make all the difference.
I had 1 or 2 questions I hope to ask you, Lord Holdhurst.
I'll be happy to provide any information I can.
Was it in this room that you gave the instructions for copying the document?
Yes, it was
Then there's no way you could have been overheard?
completely out of the question.
Did you ever mention to anyone that you intended to have the treaty copied?
Never.
You're certain of that?
Absolutely.
Well, if you never mentioned it, and Mr. Phelps didn't mention it, and nobody else knew, then the thief must have been in the room by pure chance. He saw his opportunity and took it.
You're straying outside my area of expertise, Mr. Holmes.
There's another critical matter I'd like to discuss. You feared, if I understand correctly, that very serious consequences might result from the contents of this treaty becoming known?
A shadow passed across the statesman's expressive face.
Very serious indeed.
And have any such consequences occurred?
Not yet.
If the treaty had ended up in, say, the French or Russian Foreign Office, you would have heard something by now.
I would.
Well, since nearly 10 weeks have passed and there's been no word, it's reasonable to assume, for now, that the treaty hasn't reached them.
We can hardly imagine the thief took it a frame and hang it up.
Perhaps he's waiting for a better offer.
If he waits much longer, he'll get nothing at all. The treaty will become public in a few months.
That's very important. Of course, we might suppose the thief has had a sudden illness.
An attack of brain fever, for example?
I did not say so. And now, Lord Holdhurst, we have already taken up too much of your valuable time, and we shall wish you good day.
Every success to your investigation, be the criminal who it may.
The nobleman replied, as he bowed us out the door.
He's a fine fellow,
Said Holmes as we came out into Whitehall.
but he has a struggle to keep up his position. He is far from rich and has many calls. You noticed, of course, that his boots had been resold. Now, Watson, I won't detain you from your legitimate work any longer. I shall do nothing more today unless I have an answer to my cab advertisement. But I would be extremely obliged if you would come down with me to Woking tomorrow by the same train we took yesterday.
I met him accordingly the next morning, and we traveled down to Woking together. He told me that he had received no response to his advertisement, and no fresh light had been thrown upon the case. Holmes had, when he chose to, the complete immobility of expression of a Red Indian, and I couldn't tell from his appearance whether he was pleased or not with the way things stood. I remember his conversation was about the Bertillon system of measurements, and he expressed great admiration for the French expert who devised it. We found our client still under the watchful care of his devoted nurse, though he looked considerably better than before. He rose from the sofa and greeted us without difficulty when we entered.
Any news?
Percy asked eagerly.
My report, as I expected, is a negative one. I've seen Forbes, and I've seen your uncle, and I've initiated 1 or 2 lines of inquiry, which may lead to something.
You have not lost heart, then?
By no means.
At this, Miss Harrison exclaimed with deep emotion that if they could just keep their courage and patience, the truth was bound to come out.
We have more to tell you than you have for us,
said Percy, reseating himself on the couch.
I hoped you might have something.
Yes, we had an adventure last night, one that could have been very serious.
His expression grew very grave, and I noticed a trace of fear in his eyes.
Do you know, I'm beginning to think that I'm unknowingly at the center of some massive conspiracy, that not only my honor, but my life is being targeted.
Really? That's alarming.
It sounds unbelievable. As far as I know, I don't have a single enemy in the world. Yet after what happened last night, I can't explain it any other way.
Please, tell me everything.
You see, last night was the first time I ever slept without a nurse in the room. I felt much better and thought I could manage on my own. Still, I kept a night light on. Around 2 in the morning, I had just drifted into a light sleep when a faint noise woke me. It sounded like a mouse gnawing at wood, and I lay there listening for a while, assuming that was the cause. But then the sound grew louder, and suddenly from the window, I heard a sharp metallic snick. I sat up, startled. I had no doubt now the earlier noises were someone forcing an instrument through the slit between the sashes, and the snick was the window latch being pressed back. There was a pause of about 10 minutes then, as if the intruder was waiting to see if the sound had woken me. After that, I heard a slow creaking noise. The window was being opened very cautiously. I couldn't bear it anymore. My nerves just aren't what they used to be. I jumped out of bed and threw open the shutters. A man was crouching at the window. I couldn't see much of him. He disappeared in a flash. He was wrapped in some kind of cloak that covered the lower part of his face. But I'm absolutely certain he had a weapon in his hand. It looked like a long knife. I clearly saw its gleam as he turned and ran.
This is most interesting. Pray, what did you do then?
I would have followed him through the open window if I'd been stronger. As it was, I rang the bell and roused the house. It took some time since the bell rings in the kitchen and the servants sleep upstairs. I shouted, though, and that brought Joseph down, and he woke the others. Joseph and the groom found some marks on the bed outside the window, but the weather's been so dry lately that tracking the trail across the grass was hopeless. However, there's a place on the wooden fence by the road that shows signs, as if someone had climbed over and snapped the top of the rail. I haven't told the local police yet. I thought it best to have your opinion first.
This tale seemed to have a remarkable effect on Holmes. He leapt up and began pacing the room in uncontrollable excitement.
Misfortunes never come alone.
You've certainly had your share. Do you think you could walk around the house with me?
Oh yes, I'd welcome a little sunshine. Joseph will come too.
Miss Harrison immediately offered to join us as well.
I'm afraid not. I must ask you to remain exactly where you are.
The young lady sat down again, clearly displeased. Meanwhile, her brother joined us, and the four of us set off together. We walked around the lawn to the outside of the young diplomat's window. As he had said, there were marks on the flower bed, but they were hopelessly faint and vague. Holmes bent over them briefly and then stood up, shrugging his shoulders.
I don't think anyone could make much of this. Let's walk around the house and see why the intruder chose this particular room. I would have thought the larger windows in the drawing room and dining room would have been more tempting.
Joseph suggested that those windows were more visible from the road, which might explain why the intruder avoided them.
Ah, yes, of course. There's a door here he might have tried. What's it used for?
Joseph explained that it was the tradesman's entrance, and that it was, of course, always locked at night.
Have you ever had a break-in or scare like this before?
Never.
Do you keep any valuables in the house? Anything a burglar might target?
Nothing of value.
Holmes strolled around the house with his hands in his pockets, wearing a casual air that was unusual for him.
By the way,
He said to Joseph Harrison,
I understand you found where the intruder climbed a fence. Let's take a look.
The plump young man led us to a spot where the top of one of the wooden rails was cracked. A small splinter of wood hung down. Holmes broke it off and examined it carefully.
Do you think this was done last night? It looks rather old, doesn't it?
Joseph admitted that it was possible.
There aren't any marks on the other side from someone jumping down. No, I doubt this helps us. Let's return to the bedroom and go over everything again.
Phelps was walking slowly, leaning on Joseph's arm. Holmes, however, moved swiftly across the lawn and reached the open bedroom window well before the others caught up.
Miss Harrison, you must stay exactly where you are all day. Do not let anything make you leave this room. It's absolutely vital.
Miss Harrison, clearly startled, replied that she would certainly do so if Holmes insisted.
When you go to bed, lock the bedroom door from the outside and keep the key. Promise me you'll do this.
She looked concerned and asked about Percy.
He'll come to London with us.
Still confused, she asked whether she must really stay behind.
It's for his sake. You can help him by doing this. Quick promise.
She nodded quickly, just as her brother and Phelps joined us again. Joseph, noticing his sister still seated, teasingly asked why she was sulking and urged her to come out and enjoy the sunshine. Miss Harrison, with a calm expression, replied that she had a slight headache and the room felt wonderfully cool and restful.
What do you propose now, Mr. Holmes?
Well, in investigating this minor affair, we must not lose sight of our main inquiry. It would be a very great help to me if you would come up to London with us.
At once.
Well, as soon as you conveniently can. Say in an hour.
I feel quite strong enough, if I can really be of any help.
The greatest possible.
Perhaps you would like me to stay there tonight?
I was just going to propose it.
Then, if my friend of the night comes to revisit me, he will find the bird flown. We are all in your hands, Mr. Holmes, and you must tell us exactly what you would like done. Perhaps you would prefer that Joseph came with us, so as to look after me?
Oh, no. My friend Watson is a medical man. You know, and he'll look after you. We'll have our lunch here, if you will permit us, and then we shall all three set off for town together.
It was arranged just as Holmes suggested, though Miss Harrison, following Holmes's request, excused herself from leaving the bedroom. I could not quite understand what his intention was, unless he was deliberately trying to keep her away from Phelps. The patient, however, seemed greatly relieved by both his improved health and the prospect of action, and he lunched with us in the dining room. To our surprise, after accompanying us to the station and seeing us off, Holmes calmly informed us that he had no intention of leaving Woking.
There are one or two small points which I should desire to clear up before I go. Your absence, Mr. Phelps, will in some ways rather assist me. Watson, when you reach London, you would oblige me by driving at once to Baker Street with our friend here, and remaining with him until I see you again. It is fortunate that you are old schoolfellows, as you must have much to talk over. Mr. Phelps can have the spare bedroom tonight, and I will be with you in time for breakfast, for there is a train which will take me into Waterloo at 8.
But how about our investigation in London?
He asked with disappointment.
We can do that tomorrow. I think that just at present I can be of more immediate use here.
You might tell them at Briarbrae that I hope to be back tomorrow night.
He asked as the train started.
I hardly expect to go back to Briarbrae.
He replied cheerfully, waving his hand as we departed. On our way back to London, Phelps and I tried to make sense of Holmes's sudden decision to stay behind in Woking, but nothing seemed obvious. Phelps speculated that Holmes might still be trying to uncover some clue related to the attempted break-in the night before. He expressed doubt that the intruder was an ordinary thief. Instead, he believed that some kind of deep political conspiracy was forming around him, something he couldn't fully understand, but he felt both his honor and his life were under threat. Though it sounded far-fetched, he pointed out the facts. Why would a thief try to break into a bedroom window where there was no expectation of valuables? And why would he come armed with what clearly appeared to be a long knife? He was certain it wasn't a housebreaker's tool. He had seen the flash of the blade himself. When I asked him why anyone would go to such lengths to harm him, he had no answer, only more uncertainty. I considered that, if Holmes shared the same suspicion, then it would explain his choice to remain in Woking. After all, if someone truly was trying to harm Phelps, catching that person might lead directly to the one who had stolen the Naval Treaty. It seemed highly unlikely that Phelps could have two separate enemies, one who robbed him and another who attempted to attack him. Still, Phelps was puzzled by Holmes's remark that he wouldn't return to Briarbrae, and I could tell it unsettled him. I reassured him the best I could, explaining that in all the years I had known Holmes, he had never taken any action without a sound reason. Once we arrived in London, our conversation drifted to other topics, but turned out to be a long and trying day. Phelps was still weak from his illness, and the anxiety over his lost document made him irritable and tense. I tried to distract him with talk of Afghanistan, India, and various social issues, but his mind always circled back to the treaty, wondering what Holmes might be doing whether Lord Holdhurst was taking any action, and what kind of news might come in the morning. As the evening wore on, his agitation increased. He questioned whether I had complete faith in Holmes. I assured him that I had seen Holmes succeed in many complex cases before, some even more obscure than this. But he remained doubtful, worried that the stakes here were far greater than anything Holmes had dealt with before. He seemed unsure whether Holmes was feeling optimistic about solving the case. I told him that Holmes hadn't said much on the matter, but I had noticed a pattern over time. Holmes tended to be most quiet when he actually was on the right trail, but wasn't yet ready to be certain. When he was truly stumped, he usually said so. Seeing how restless and exhausted Phelps had become, I gently urged him to get some rest for the night, so he could be refreshed for whatever the next day might bring. Eventually, I managed to convince Phelps to follow my advice and try to get some rest, though it was clear from his agitated state that he wouldn't find much sleep that night. His anxious energy was contagious. I found myself lying awake for hours, turning over the case in my mind. I kept constructing one theory after another, each more far-fetched than the last. What was Holmes doing in Woking? Why had he insisted that Miss Harrison remain in the sick room all day? Why had he deliberately avoided informing the household at Briarbrae of his decision to stay nearby? I strained my mind to come up with a theory that would tie all the pieces together, but sleep finally overtook me before I could settle on any single explanation. When I awoke at 7, I immediately checked on Phelps. He looked worn and exhausted, having clearly passed the night without rest. The first thing he asked me was whether Holmes had returned yet. I assured him that Holmes would arrive exactly when he intended, neither a moment earlier nor later. My confidence was justified. A little after 8, we saw a hansom cab pull up outside. Holmes stepped out, and from the window, we could both see that his left hand was wrapped in a bandage. His face was pale and stern, and there was a grim set to his features. He entered the house, but didn't come upstairs right away. Phelps, watching him, immediately assumed the worst. He was convinced Holmes looked like a man who had failed. I couldn't deny that there was something defeated in Holmes's appearance. For a moment, I even began to think that the answer to the whole mystery must lie in London after all. Phelps let out a groan of despair.
I don't know how it is, but I had hoped for so much from his return. But surely his hand was not tied up like that yesterday. What can be the matter?
As Holmes entered the room, I immediately asked whether he was hurt. "You are not wounded, Holmes?"
No, it is only a scratch through my own clumsiness.
He replied casually, nodding good morning to both of us.
This case of yours, Mr. Phelps, is certainly one of the darkest which I have ever investigated.
I feared that you would find it beyond you.
It has been a most remarkable experience.
That bandage tells of adventures. Won't you tell us what has happened?
After breakfast, my dear Watson, remember that I have breathed 30 miles of Surrey air this morning. I suppose there's been no answer for my cabman advertisement? Well, we cannot expect to score every time.
Just as I was about to ring the bell, Mrs. Hudson came in carrying tea and coffee. A few minutes later, she returned with 3 covered dishes, and we all gathered around the table. Holmes with a ravenous appetite, myself filled with curiosity, and Phelps sunk deep in gloomy despair.
Mrs. Hudson has risen to the occasion,
he said, lifting the cover from one dish.
Her cuisine is a little limited, but she has as good an idea of breakfast as a Scotchwoman. What have you here, Watson?
Ham and eggs.
Good. What are you going to take, Mr. Phelps? Curried fowl or eggs? Or will you help yourself?
Thank you. I can eat nothing.
Oh, come. Try the dish before you.
Thank you. I would really rather not.
Well then,
said Holmes with a mischievous twinkle in his eye.
I suppose you have no objection to helping me?
Phelps, though clearly unwilling, reached out and lifted the cover from the dish in front of Holmes. The moment he saw what was underneath, he screamed and stared in shock, his face going as pale as the white plate before him. There, lying in the center, was a small cylinder of blue-gray paper. He snatched it up, his eyes devouring every line, and then he leapt up, dancing around the room in wild joy, clutching it to his chest and crying out in delight. But the outburst drained all his strength, and he collapsed into a chair, so limp and faint from emotion that we had to pour brandy down his throat to keep him conscious.
It was too bad to spring it on you like this, but Watson here will tell you that I never can resist a touch of the dramatic.
Overcome with gratitude, Phelps seized Holmes's hand and kissed it.
God bless you. You have saved my honor.
Well, my own was at stake, you know. I assure you, it is just as hateful to me to fail in a case as it is to you to blunder over a commission.
Phelps tucked the precious document away in the innermost pocket of his coat and then turned back to Holmes, clearly torn between gratitude and curiosity.
I have not the heart to interrupt your breakfast any further, and yet I am dying to know how you got it and where it was.
Holmes calmly drank a full cup of coffee, turned his attention to the ham and eggs on his plate, and after finishing, lit his pipe and settled comfortably into his chair.
I'll tell you what I did first, and how I came to do it afterward. After leaving you at the station, I took a delightful walk through the beautiful Surrey countryside to a pretty little village called Ripley. I had some tea added in there and took the precaution of filling my flask and putting a packet of sandwiches in my pocket. I stayed in the village until evening, and then I returned to Woking, arriving near Briarbrae just after sunset. Well, I waited until the road was completely clear. It's never a very busy road, I believe, and then I climbed over the fence into the property.
Surely the gate was open.
Yes, but I have a peculiar taste in these matters. I chose the spot where the 3-for-a-tree stand, and I slipped over the fence behind their cover without any risk of being seen from the house. Then I crouched among the bushes on the other side and crawled from one to the next. Note the disreputable state of my trouser knees, until I reached the rhododendron bush just opposite your bedroom window. There I waited and watched. The blind in your room wasn't down, and I could see Miss Harrison sitting at the table reading. At 10:15, she closed her book, shut the shutters, and left the room. I heard her shut the door, and I was quite certain she locked it.
The key?
Yes, I had asked Miss Harrison to lock the door from the outside and take the key with her when she went to bed. She followed my instructions exactly, and without her cooperation, you wouldn't have that document in your pocket right now. After she left and the lights went out, I was left crouching in the rhododendron bush. The night was clear, but the wait was long and tedious. It had a bit of that thrilling anticipation a hunter feels lying in wait by the water for big game. Still, it dragged on, almost as long, Watson, as when we waited in that deadly room during the speckled band case. There's a church clock down at Woking that chimes every 15 minutes, and more than once I thought it had stopped altogether. Finally, around 2 in the morning, I heard a bolt slide back and a key turn. A moment later, the servant's door opened, and Mr. Joseph Harrison stepped out into the moonlight.
Joseph?
Yes. He was bareheaded, but had a black coat thrown over his shoulder, probably to hide his face quickly if needed. He tiptoed under the shadow of the wall. When he reached the window, he used a long-bladed knife to slide through the sash and push back the catch. Then he flung open the window, slipped his knife through the crack in the shutters, lifted the bar, and opened them. From where I was hiding, I had a perfect view of the room and his every movement. He lit the 2 candles on the mantelpiece, then rolled back the carpet near the door. He soon uncovered a square wooden board, like the kind plumbers leave to access gas pipe joints. This one was over the T-joint that supplies the kitchen. From beneath it, he pulled out the cylinder of paper, put the board back, replaced the carpet, blew out the candles, and walked directly into my arms as I waited outside the window. Well, it turns out Joseph has a bit more fight in him than I expected. He came at me with his knife, and I had to grab him twice before I got control of him, and I caught a cut on the knuckles for my trouble. He looked like he wanted to murder me with the only eye he could see from when we finished. But eventually, he listened to reason and handed over the papers. Once I had them, I let him go. But I sent full details to Forbes this morning. If Forbes is fast enough to arrest him, good. But if, as I suspect, he finds the nest empty, then maybe it's just as well, for the government at least. I think Lord Holdhurst, and perhaps Mr. Percy Phelps, would prefer the matter never reach a police court.
My God, Do you mean to say that during all these long 10 weeks of agony, the stolen papers were in the same room as me?
Yes, that's exactly where they were.
And Joseph? Joseph, a villain and a thief.
I'm afraid Joseph's true character is deeper and far more dangerous than one might expect from his appearance. From what he told me this morning, it seems he's lost a lot of money gambling on the stock market, and he's desperate to fix his fortunes. Being entirely self-centered when the opportunity arose, he didn't let either his sister's happiness or your reputation stand in his way.
Phelps collapsed into his chair, utterly overwhelmed.
My head is spinning. Your words have left me stunned.
The principal difficulty in your case,
Holmes explained in his characteristically didactic tone,
lay in the fact that there was too much evidence. The vital clues were buried under irrelevant ones. Out of all the facts presented to us, we had to extract only the essential ones and then piece them together in the right order to reconstruct this very unusual chain of events. I had already started to suspect Joseph when I learned you had planned to travel home with him that night. That made it plausible he might stop by for you, knowing the Foreign Office well. And when I heard someone had tried to get into your bedroom, the only room where Joseph could have hidden anything, especially after you told us how you made him leave once you arrived with the doctor, my suspicions became certainties, especially since the attempt occurred on the first night without a nurse present, which showed the intruder was quite familiar with the house's routines.
How blind I have been.
The facts of the case, as I've worked them out, are these. Joseph Harrison entered the building through the Charles Street door, and being familiar with the place, went straight into your room just after you stepped out. Finding no one there, he rang the bell, but at that very moment, his eyes caught sight of the document on the table. One glance was enough to reveal that chance had placed a highly valuable state document in his hands. In an instant, he pocketed it and disappeared. A few minutes passed, just enough time for him to make his escape, before the sleepy commissionaire drew your attention to the bell. Joseph took the first train to Woking, reviewed his prize, and, realizing its immense value, hid it somewhere he thought was secure, intending to retrieve it later and sell it to the French embassy or another interested party. Then came your sudden return. With no warning, he was kicked out of his room, and from that point onward, there were always at least two people there, blocking his access to the hiding place. The situation must have driven him mad. Finally, he thought he saw a chance. He attempted to sneak in but failed because you were awake. You remember not taking your usual sleeping draft that night?
I remember.
I suspect he tampered with your sleeping mixture to ensure you'd be unconscious. He must have assumed you'd be out cold. Naturally, I knew he'd try again when the opportunity was safe. That's why I kept Miss Harrison in the room all day, to prevent him from anticipating our trap. Once we let him think the coast was clear, I stayed behind to catch him, just as I described. I already had a strong belief that the papers were still in the room, but I didn't want to rip up the entire floor or walls to search for them. So I let him retrieve the document from its hiding place, sparing me a great deal of trouble. Is there anything else you'd like me to clarify?
Why did he try to get in through the window the first time when he could have just used the door?
To reach the door, he'd have to pass 7 bedrooms. But from the window, he had easy access to the lawn. Anything else?
You don't think he intended to kill me, do you? That knife was just a tool, right?
It may be so, but all I can say for sure is that Mr. Joseph Harrison is the kind of man I'd be extremely reluctant to rely on for mercy.
And so, the mystery of the missing treaty was brought to light, not with loud accusations or courtroom drama, but with quiet cunning, sleepless sacrifice, and the precision of a detective who understood the human heart just as well as he read crime scene. It wasn't just a story about espionage or betrayal. It was about the weight of honor, the desperation of redemption, and how the darkest secrets often hide in the most familiar places, beneath the floorboards of trust. But at the center of it all stood Sherlock Holmes, calm, relentless, and unshaken, proving once again that the smallest clue, the faintest shadow, can unravel the greatest of schemes. The Naval Treaty reminds us that sometimes justice lies not in punishment, but in protection, and perhaps in preserving dignity when the world watches in silence. If this story made you lean in, gave you chills, or simply reminded you why Holmes remains timeless, let your thoughts sail into the comments below. What would you have done if you were Percy Phelps? Could you have noticed what Holmes did? We'd love to hear. And if you haven't already, like, subscribe, and share this story with fellow mystery lovers. For the most immersive experience, headphones are your best companion. Every sigh, every creak, every whispered deduction, meant to be felt as much as heard. Until next time, stay alert, stay curious, because in the world of Sherlock Holmes, the truth is never far. It's just cleverly hidden. This is Echoes of Stories, where every whisper of mystery finds its voice.